Hello, and welcome to the National Archives Foundation's inaugural live stream program. I'm Patrick Madden, the Executive Director of the National Archives Foundation, and thanks for joining us for some history fun today. Through this programming, we hope to open the virtual door of the National Archives to you while we're at home. And every Tuesday, we bring you an email called The American Experience, serving up interesting videos with some content that will guarantee to put a smile on your face. And on Friday, some history snacks, delivering some engaging content for our young history explorer. Today we have Thomas Jefferson talking to us live, and he will be taking your questions after a short presentation. So a couple of things, if you've not been on a Zoom meeting yet, I want to give you a little bit of advice. First, to improve your viewing experience, if you go to the top right and select speaker view, that'll take some of the distractions of the others who are with us away from your screen. And if you want to ask a question, we ask you to use the chat room. You should be able to chat the National Archives Foundation, which is one of the accounts. When you do that, you will submit your question, and we're going to try and get through as many as we can. Okay, well, who's ready to meet a president? Let me formally introduce the author, lawyer, architect, inventor, farmer, former ambassador, the third president of the United States, and our birthday boy, Mr. Thomas Jefferson. Happy birthday, Mr. President. Please share with us some of your thoughts today.
I have decided that I want to share with you some of the things that I enjoyed doing, starting with some of the things that I enjoyed most from when I was a little boy, and then moving into some of the things that I enjoyed when I was a grown-up. Now, first what I'm going to do is share with you a few stories from this book here, which is a book of Aesop's Fables. When I was a young man in Virginia, well, I was a little boy in Virginia. I wasn't even a young man yet. There were people who traveled the countryside called chapmen. They carried all sorts of things with them, but most importantly, they carried little books with them, usually pamphlets, nothing very fancy or expensive. And among the various kinds of books they carried were books that were appropriate for children, such as Aesop's Fables. Oh, they carried things like the story of Tom Thumb, the story of Jack the Giant Killer. But I'm going to focus today on Aesop's Fables because I referred to Aesop's Fables later in my life as well. They're very short. Most of them are just about a minute long or so. So first I'm going to start with one that's called The Fox and the Grapes. The Fox and the Grapes. A fox one day spied a beautiful bunch of ripe grapes hanging from a vine trained along the branches of a tree. The grapes seemed ready to burst with juice, and the fox's mouth watered as he gazed longingly at them. The bunch hung from the high branch, and the fox had to jump for it. The first time he jumped, he missed it by a long way. So he walked off a short distance and took up a running leap at it, only to fall short once more. Again and again he tried, but in vain. Now he sat down and looked at the grapes in disgust. "What a fool I am," he said. "Here I am wearing myself out to get a bunch of grapes that are sour and not worth gaping for." And off he walked, very, very scornfully. Now, this might seem a very strange story for me to read to you. It doesn't even have a happy ending, because the fox didn't get his grapes. But I think what Aesop was doing when he told this story, and certainly what I gained from it, was that sometimes when someone can't get something they want, or when someone else has something that they want, but they still can't get anything like it, they become angry and pretend like they didn't want it in the first place. And that's not very nice, and it certainly isn't very honest. I referred to this particular Aesop's Fable when my friend John Adams was elected president, and I was elected vice president. Things worked differently back then. That meant I had the second highest number of votes, and he had the highest number. And I said I didn't want to be like the fox and the grapes, but I also didn't want the job of the president. That's a whole other story. Now, let's see here. Speaking of other stories, I think I'm going to read one that's a little bit longer, This one's about 2 minutes long for me to read it out loud. This one of Aesop's fables was called The Frogs Who Wished for a King. Now, you may recall, I didn't like kings very much. The frogs were tired of governing themselves. They had so much freedom that it had spoiled them, and they did nothing but sit around croaking in a bored manner and wishing for a government that could entertain them with the pomp and the display of royalty and rule them in a way to make them know that they were being ruled. No milk and water government for them, they declared. So they sent a petition to Jupiter asking for a king. Jupiter saw what simple and foolish creatures the frogs were, but to keep them quiet and to make them think they had a king, he threw down a huge log, which fell into the water with a great splash. The frogs hid themselves among the reeds and grasses, thinking that the new king was some fearful giant. But soon they discovered how tame and peaceable King Log was. In a short time, the younger frogs were using him as a diving platform, while the older frogs made him a meeting place where they complained loudly to Jupiter about the government. To teach the frogs a lesson, the ruler of the gods now sent a crane, that's a big bird, a crane, to be king of Frogland. The crane proved to be a very different sort of king from King Log. He gobbled up the poor frogs right and left, and they soon saw what fools they had been. In mournful croaks, they begged Jupiter to take away the cruel tyrant before they should all be destroyed. "How now," cried Jupiter, "are you not yet content? You have what you asked for, and so you have only yourselves to blame for your misfortunes." Now, I imagine that there are some good kings in the world, but you remember I helped to lead a revolution that made sure America did not have a king and would never have a king. But after the American Revolution was over, I found that it seemed like some people wanted to have a king. So I referred to this story more than once over the years when I learned about Americans not wanting to take the responsibility and do the hard work of governing themselves, but instead wanting someone else to do all that hard work for them. Let us see here. Oh, here's another good one. This one also is something like the one I just read about, well, not really people, animals, but creatures who weren't being very responsible about taking care of themselves. This one of Aesop's fables is called The Wolves and the Sheep. A pack of wolves lurked near the sheep pasture, but the dogs kept them all at a respectful distance, and the sheep grazed in perfect safety. But now the wolves thought of a plan to trick the sheep. "Why is there always this hostility between us?" they said. If it were not for those dogs who are always stirring up trouble, I am sure that we could get along beautifully," the wolves said to the sheep. "Send them away and you will see what good friends we become." Well, the sheep were easily fooled. They persuaded the dogs to go away. And that very evening, the wolves had the grandest feast of their lives. Not all of these have happy endings, I'm afraid, but there's a reason why Aesop told these stories like this. It didn't all have happy endings. And there's a reason why children like myself were encouraged to read them. So we would learn lessons from the mistakes of others. Of course, these are just pretend stories. That way we wouldn't have to learn the lessons the hard way by making mistakes ourselves. And the one about the wolves and the sheep was one I referred to a lot as well over the years. When I saw that here in America, there are a lot of people who work very hard to watch over their government, to make sure it behaves itself, because that's our job as citizens in the United States, to make sure our government does its job. But there are other people who thought that they shouldn't watch over the government. They should just trust the government to do whatever it says. And I said those kind of people were like those sheep, sending away the dogs and trusting the wolves. Let's see, I'll find another one here. Oh, well, now this one does have a happy ending. So I'll read this one, and then we'll see how much time I have left to read these Aesop's fables before we move on to the next part of our time together. Before I go on to this story, I want to thank a friend of mine who made this book for me. He bound the book. Now, his name is Paul McClintock, and he's very talented, because the closer you look at this book, the more you can see that it looks very much like, just like, the kinds of books that I had in my day. And Mr. McClintock worked very hard at that. Let's see here. So, this story is about a father and his sons and a bundle of sticks. A certain father had a family of sons who were forever quarreling among themselves. No words he could say did the least bit of good. One day, he asked them to bring him a bundle of sticks. Then, handing the bundle to each of his sons, in turn, he told them each to try to break it one by one. But although each one tried his best, none was able to do so. The father then untied the bundle and gave the sticks to his sons to break one by one stick at a time. This they were easily able to do. "My sons," said the father, "do you not see how certain it is that if you cooperate with one another and help each other, it will be impossible for your enemies to defeat you? But if you are divided among yourselves, you will be no stronger than that single stick taken away from the bundle." Now, this one of Aesop's fables was particularly important to me. In 1776, after I helped write the Declaration of Independence, I worked with Benjamin Franklin and John Adams on suggesting ideas for a symbol and a saying, or a motto, that would stand for the United States, and the symbol would be called the Great Seal of the United States. Each of us came up with our own ideas for what would be the Great Seal of the United States. One of my suggestions that would be on one side of the seal was a moment from that story of Aesop's fables, of the father offering that bundle of sticks to each of his sons. Because I wanted Americans to remind themselves over the years that the United States will only be strong if we stick together and act like one people, just like that father was trying to teach his sons how to do. Now, turns out that wasn't chosen to be the Great Seal of the United States, but I'm sure that's something you can find out on your own. Well, that was something else that I wanted to put Mr. McClintock's book aside here. Something else I wanted to do as a bit of a birthday gift to myself. Instead of talking about politics all day long, I'd like to share some things that I particularly enjoy. Now, before I show you this, I want all of you to look at your fingernails. You don't have to show me, but look at your fingernails. Now, think about how small your fingernails are in comparison to how big you are. One of the things I like to do is I like to study all kinds of animals. I like to study animals that I saw, and I like to study animals that I did not see. One of the ways you can study animals that you do not ever see is by studying the bones of those animals. This here is what you might call a fingernail, right? It would go on the end of an index finger like that. It's really a claw, of course. And this is a claw from a large animal that I studied. Now, can you imagine how big this animal, look again at your fingernails. Now look how big this one claw or fingernail is. How big do you suppose that animal is? It's quite big. I originally, looking at only some of the bones of this animal, sent by a friend of mine in what was at the time Greenbrier County, Virginia, That's changed over the years because another state has been developed around it since my day. I received some of those bones and I wrote a paper about it. So you write reports for school sometimes about things. Well, I like to write reports just for fun. As a matter of fact, I was a member of a scientific society called the American Philosophical Society, and I wrote a report on this animal for that society when they elected me the president of that society based in Philadelphia. That was about a week after I became vice president of the United States. I thought this was a gigantic cat with big claws, so I called it the Megalonyx, which is just a very fancy way of saying big claw. As it turned out, it wasn't a big cat. It was a giant ground sloth, a very big sloth that's almost 10 feet tall. I didn't know that at the time, but just before I published my paper, my report on it, I found in one of the bookstalls in Philadelphia someone who'd found the entire skeleton. I found something they had written, and it showed it was in fact not a big cat, so I was able to correct my paper a little bit before I published it, and I wasn't embarrassed. Maybe that's something you can do. Maybe you, when you have to be at home for a long period of time, you can study animal bones. So it turns out, when I sent Lewis and Clark on their expedition, I didn't know if this great big ground sloth, this Megalonyx, was still walking around, so I told them to look for one. Maybe if you saw a 9-foot tall sloth, you'd be able to see it easily too. They never saw one, and we had theories about that, why they might not have never seen one. Later on, though, because this was the first paper written about vertebrates, meaning animals with backbones, and vertebrate, which you call paleontology, so animals that are no longer around, in the United States, this animal was named after me. It was called the Megalonyx jeffersonii, Jefferson's big claw. Maybe someday you'll have an animal named after you if you write enough papers on them. Now that brings up another something special I want to share with you. I have a few of these. Now, before I tell you anything much more about it, I want to remind you that right now, I think you've got a bit of a yellow fever epidemic that's going around. So you don't want to do what these two hands are doing on this giant medal here. Don't want to do that. But once the yellow fever epidemic or smallpox or whatever it is you have going around, we had those kind of things in my day. Once it passes, you'll be able to do this again because they're shaking hands. This is the peace medal, and I have a few of them of different sizes that we had sent out. This one's smaller, with Lewis and Clark. I remember I mentioned that I suggested they should look for those gigantic ground sloths just in case they would see one. And they should give these peace medals, which also have pictures of me on the back. See, looks just like me, yes? Well, maybe not just like me, but close enough. To give to the chiefs of the various Indian tribes that they saw on their expedition. And there was a very important message on the peace medals. Let's see, I'll hold it still so you can see it. You can also look it up yourself by simply looking for Thomas Jefferson Peace Medal or Lewis and Clark Peace Medal. It says peace and friendship, because we wanted that with all of the Indian peoples that we came across or that Lewis and Clark came across. I even have the smallest, they had 3 sizes. Here is a model of the smallest version of them. There's the hand clasp, the tomahawk and the peace pipe on one side. And there's a very small version of me right there. Just a little tiny me, a miniature me. And there it is compared to the largest one of the peace medals. Because Lewis and Clark were not just a big camping expedition going on an adventure. They were also sent out by the United States government as a diplomatic expedition. I mentioned diplomacy. That brings me up to something else I wanted to tell you about. This is a code device that I designed. I did not invent it, but I designed one that's very much like this. This is about 1/3 the length of the one I designed, which this has spindles on it with letters of the alphabet all around each spindle, randomly situated. This has 12 spindles. The one I designed had 36, and it would be very difficult to show you that one in the small space we have right now. In my day, we didn't have to squeeze into little boxes like this to talk to each other. The way this code device works is you can make as many of them as you want, make sure they're identical though. Then you give one of these anywhere else that will just be gibberish. It will be nonsense. And copy out the other line somewhere else that doesn't say anything and write that in your letter. Your friend who has an identical one like yours will receive that letter, and some of it will be written in regular language and some in that nonsense that he knows is from the code device, then he will go to his code device and he will spin it around to line up that line of nonsense that is just to make it just like the one that you sent him. And then he or she will look around somewhere else on the device to find a line of text. Because once you line up the same nonsense line, you line up the same text. Here's a message that I have spelled out on mine. Let's see here. Can you read what that says? I'll hold it very careful. Very, very still. Now, if you were able to read that, and you can read, you are clever, then you're right. And I knew you could do that anyway, because you are clever. But of course, you can write anything you want if you design your own code devices. They don't have to look like this. Let's see here. What else can I show you? Oh, you know what else? Yes, sir.
We have a lot of questions. Is it
Oh, yeah.
possible to get started with some of our questions?
Certainly.
Okay. Well, one, which I think we're all wondering about, is there really a map on the back of the Declaration?
Is there a map on the back of the Declaration of Independence? I put no map on the back of the Declaration of Independence. I'm afraid I never did, so don't put any lemon juice on it and keep it away from any open flame. You're not going to find a secret map. I'm also not a Freemason. Not that those two are connected, or if they were, I wouldn't admit it.
Did you ever study drawing or architecture? I feel like you have some things you might.
See here. Well, I actually have a few things here that I can show you. I never did formally study architecture, just like I never formally studied what you would call paleontology. I like to study everything I can. I wrote to my daughter once that not a sprig of grass grows uninteresting to me. That means everything's interesting. I'm going to hide my face and talk for a moment. That's not polite, but forgive me. This is a drawing that I made. It's a drawing of the first house that I built. Now, I called this house Monticello. The reason why I called this house, which this is one of my own drawings of it, Monticello, was because I also studied Italian. I didn't take classes in Italian either. I just was curious, so I studied it because I wanted to learn about Italian architecture. And this version of my house, the first version of my house, Monticello, was based on the drawings of someone who did study architecture a long time before I was born, named Andrea Palladio, and he was my favorite architect. This looks like some of his drawings. I named it Monticello because I put it on top of a small mountain, and Monticello is Italian for low or small mountain. Now, as the years went on, this is about what it looked like in 1784, before I left for France. I got some ideas while I was in France because I was always studying, even when I was traveling. When I came back from France, I then began to change my house. And if you've seen my house, you'll know the top of it isn't just pointy like that. There's also a dome on it because I put a dome on it later. I have a lot of other architectural drawings as well, but that, of course, is my home, so it is my favorite.
Did you ever meet Alexander Hamilton?
Did I ever meet Alexander Hamilton? Unfortunately, yes. I'm afraid that Alexander Hamilton and I did not get along. We disagreed about a lot of things, about government, but rather than my going into what we disagreed about, because this is my birthday and I don't want to talk about arguments all the time, I will say that I eventually came to respect Alexander Hamilton. And he eventually came to respect me, even though we never agreed with each other. And it is possible to respect someone. We respected each other the way you respect someone that maybe you aren't friends with them, but you can still respect someone who isn't your friend. He even said that people should vote for me during a presidential election when things got a little bit complicated. I never thought he should be president, but I still learned to respect him, even though I didn't agree with him.
Good. What are your thoughts on women's rights, and should they have the right to vote?
Should women have the right to vote? Ooh, I couldn't imagine that during my day. My Secretary of the Treasury, Albert Gallatin, one day suggested to me that because we weren't getting enough men, who were the only ones who could hold public office, to step forward and take on appointed officers in government, that we should appoint women to office. And I said I wasn't ready for that, and I said I didn't think the American people were ready for that. But maybe someday they will be ready for that. And after all men are created equal. That's what I wrote in the Declaration of Independence. Doesn't just mean all boys and all men. It means mankind. It means the human race. That doesn't mean we're the same, though. Equality and sameness, those are very different things. Maybe this is a good way to say this because I have a lot of children listening today. All men are created equal means both boys and girls, and it means everyone is special in their own way, which means everyone is called to serve their country in the way that they are most talented.
Very good. Do you have a favorite one of your occupations?
Do I have a favorite one of my occupations? Oh, well, if I had had my choice and politics had not come into play, I would have liked to just have my home on top of my mountain, or maybe near a river that was land that was well watered. Allow me just to be a farmer, where I could study my science like the claws and the bones of animals, and tinker with inventions and study the stars and everything, and have just enough food for the table and maybe enough extra to sell so that my family could have the extra things that we can't make ourselves. I would say being a gardener and a farmer really would have been my favorite of my occupations. And this is actually perhaps an answer to what some of you may be wondering today. If today is my 277th birthday, why don't I look 277? This is part of why gardening is my favorite of my occupations, because though I am an old man, I'm still a gardener, and I am ever a young gardener. It keeps you young.
Very good. Well, related to your estate, we've had a couple questions about why did you own slaves?
Why did I own slaves? Because I was born a slave owner. I didn't know anything other than that. My first memory was when I was 2 years old. My family was moving to a home that was new to us. Of course, it had been around for quite some time. It was called Tuckahoe. I remember being carried on a pillow on the back of a horse by a slave up to the new house. So that's all I knew. Now, later in my life, I realized there was something wrong with the institution of slavery, but I also realized I depended on it, and I was never able to figure out how to not need to depend on it, and also have my country not depend on it and get rid of it without destroying the economy of my country. It's something I didn't succeed at. I succeeded in some things, and perhaps you'll learn about some of those things, but I think it's very important to be honest with people, including yourself, when you don't succeed in things. Otherwise, how can you and other people learn?
Well, you mentioned Alexander Hamilton. I heard that you didn't really get along with John Adams, but you became friends later. Can you explain?
Well, first, John Adams and I were friends. Then we were not friends. Then we were friends again. So that is about 50 years in about 10 seconds. Mr. Adams and I worked together in the Revolution. We even worked together on the Declaration of Independence. Why, I have my final rough draft of the Declaration of Independence right here, with some of my scratch outs and changes. It also has some of John Adams and Benjamin Franklin's scratch outs and changes on it as well. We worked very closely together in England and in France and Holland, but then politics began to get in between us, which sometimes happens. Maybe some of the children who are attending our meeting today have seen adults argue about politics when they argue about hardly anything else. That happened to John Adams and me. But as time went on, both Mr. Adams and I realized that we really were good friends. And we decided we didn't want to let politics get in between that. So we were able to, once we were retired from government, no longer were working in government, we were able to get past that and talk with each other again, writing letters, because we couldn't talk in little boxes like you can in your day. And we wrote to each other, it must have lasted 14 years of writing dozens and dozens of letters. We became so close that I even heard rumors that we came to pass from this earth the first time before I came back again to visit today. On the same day, the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence. I hope that serves as a good example to everyone who might be attending our meeting today, that just because someone disagrees with you in politics, that does not make them your enemy. Maybe, like John Adams and me, they just disagree on the best way to protect America.
Well, that's a great way to wrap things up. I think since it's your birthday, do you have a wish you would like to give the country today?
I do. And this might seem a little ironic because it is my birthday and we're celebrating that. But first, I want to thank you for celebrating my birthday by learning. Because if you want to commemorate my life and honor my legacy, the best thing you can do is to learn. Learn the difficult things, especially, as well as the fun things, and help others to learn. Because America will only be strong as long as Americans love learning. So that is my wish for America. In celebrating my birthday and celebrating America's birthday, the best way you can commemorate me and you can make America strong is to learn everything you can. Ask questions, and when someone doesn't answer your question, ask them again.
Very good. Well, sir, it's been an honor. We're so delighted to have you. And I know if I can ask those of us who are on the line with you to give a virtual applause at your camera, that would be wonderful. Thank you so much. We're delighted you could join us. We also want to thank the American Historical Theater for partnering with us on this program. You can find out more at their website. And we truly appreciate our donors and our members who are with us. You too can join this cool group of history lovers, history buffs, genealogy enthusiasts, researchers by joining and visiting our website at archivesfoundation.org. And if you like that cipher or that coder that Mr. Jefferson showed us, we have similar ones on sale at nationalarchivesstore.org. And you too can write secret letters as well. This is our first ever virtual live stream. We're delighted to bring more of these to you over the next coming weeks and months. So stay tuned. If you're not getting our emails, please sign up on our website to get our emails. We will be interviewing journalist and author Alelia Bundles about her new Netflix series, Self-Made, about Madam C.J. Walker. We will also be talking to mixologist Derek Brown for a history happy hour. So it'll be a mix of things, trying to bring the archives right there into your home. There's lots of things online to explore at archives.gov as well. On behalf of the National Archives Foundation, thank you for joining us today. Until our next program, be safe and be well.